Hello! Today we're going to talk about note taking and citations for the English 1 You Are the Expert project. So, as always, we have some goals for this lesson. The first one, we're going to have some vocabulary. So, we're going to have to define note taking vocabulary such as paraphrase, source, plagiarism, and cite. We're also going to have to understand the procedures of the note card system. Then, once we've learned about the note card system, which is a type of note taking, we're going to practice it. So, here is our first example of a vocabulary word related to note taking. The first one is source. That's where you find your information. For the You Are the Expert project, you're going to have 4 different genres of sources. It might be websites or books, magazines, real people interviews, articles, or even videos. So an example would be Cole used 3 sources while researching his speech. The next word is paraphrase. Paraphrase means when you reword something written or spoken by someone else, and you put it in your own words. This is when you focus on just the facts or specific ideas and not the whole main idea or the general gist. You're kind of digesting it down into smaller little chunks in your own words. So Sam paraphrased the president's speech into his own simpler words. So one might take the very complicated line 7 years ago by Abraham Lincoln and paraphrase it to just the facts, 87 years ago, because that's what 7 years ago means in my own words. Now, paraphrase is different than summary or summarizing. Summarizing is when you retell the main ideas or the gist of an article or a video or a source where you're just kind of making it one small little sentence. You're summarizing it in a nutshell. You're written in your own words, but you're focused less on an individual fact and more on the overall point. Catherine summarized the overall plot of the book that she read. Here's an example. If I read an article about cats, here is a summary. The overall idea of this article is that people who own cats are more beautiful than those who are not cat owners. Now, when we do research, we're always going to have to cite. And what that means is giving credit in your writing and in a works cited page to the people who came up with the information or ideas first. And there are many ways to cite your source. And not having what are called citations is technically a form of plagiarism or cheating. I'm going to go into that a little bit more. Kira made sure to cite all 3 sources in her speech. Now, this might look really complicated, but one of the things we're going to have to do is create a works cited page. And in a works cited page, we have something called a bibliographical MLA citation. Now, that sounds really complicated, but basically, it's a very specific way of showing your source and writing it in a specific way so everybody knows what you're talking about. It's going to include things like the author, the article title, the website title, the date you read it, the date it was published, the website URL, and the source type. I will teach you this a little bit later, but I just want you to be aware that this is something that we might have to do. In addition to a works cited page, also known as a bibliography, we're going to have to do things called in-text citations. What this means is, as we're writing, we're going to have to tell our readers where we got the information so they can kind of cross-reference. They can look at the information in our writing and then double check and see a little bit more about that source in our works cited page. So we might use phrases like according to, or John Doe reports, or Jane Doe said, or as Mr. Smith noted, as Miss Smith concluded. And here are a list of a lot of different verbs that we might use to give in-text citations. Sometimes, however, we don't need to have one of those fancy words. We might also just make a little note as we go along. When we put in a paraphrased or a direct quoted piece of information, we're going to have to do what's called a parenthetical citation. A parenthetical citation is when you tell us the author's last name and the page number from the book or the website in a little parentheses at the end of the fact. If there's no author, then use a shortened version of the article title, or if it was a corporate author, like a big company, tell us that. So for example, The Impacts of Global Warming, 7, or National Geographic, 7. If there's no page number, because oftentimes websites don't have page numbers as well as databases, you don't need to have a page number. Make sure you post this after any fact in your writing, even if you paraphrased it. Our next vocabulary word is plagiarism. This is one that's really important because it's taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as your own. This might be as simple as just not putting citations in your paper. If you only put works cited pages in and you don't do in-text citations, now that you're in high school, that's actually technically plagiarism. So plagiarism can be accidental, so we're going to work together to make sure that we are not plagiarizing. Leah cited her sources to make sure she was not accidentally plagiarizing. Now, when I was in school, we learned about something called the note card system to help us keep track of all of our sources as we were researching and making sure that we were writing our paper. Now, here's the problem, is that now that we have iPads and other technology, I think we can use other things to help us. So even though I'm going to say note card, actually, we're going to keep track of our resources in Google Slides. Of course, if you would rather use actual physical note cards, please be my guest. Now, the note card system is a method to keep track of sources in order to better cite them to prevent accidental plagiarism. So we're going to keep track of our research and our source information on note cards or Google Slides. Now, we're doing this instead of just copying, pasting information into a Google Doc or some other site, is that we want to make sure that we're specifically making sure that we have the MLA citation down and we're keeping track of whether or not a piece of information is a paraphrase, meaning we wrote it down in our own words, a summary, a general gist of an article, or a direct quotation, meaning it's word for word the exact way it appears on the page. We want to keep track of that so that we can cite our source the way we need to. So every time I read a source, whether it's a book, a magazine, or a database article, I'm going to need a few different kinds of note-taking note cards. One, I'm going to have to write down all sorts of information about the source on what's called a source card. If I write things down in my own words, I'm going to write that down in a note card, which I'm going to label paraphrases. And if I write down things exactly the way they appear on the page or on the website, I'm going to title that note card a quotation card. Here is an example of a source card. As you can see at the very top, I named the source where I told the article title that I read. Since it's the first source that I read, I numbered it Source 1. In the middle, I went to EasyBib, which is a website that helps you format MLA citations, and I created the MLA citation and pasted it in the center. Don't worry about doing this today. I will definitely teach you to do this later. At the very bottom, I wrote down what kind of website it was. Or what kind of source it was, and it was a website. Then, the other corner, I wrote a quick summary, so if I needed to go back and find something, I can remember what the source was really about. This is an example of a direct quotation card. All of the information on this card is exactly the way it appeared in the article. By labeling it direct quotation, I know that if I use this in my writing, I have to write quotation marks around it to show that somebody else wrote these words first. Now, if I'm just going to jot down notes in my own words, I'm going to jot down and write paraphrase so that I remember these are my own words based on someone else's. This is going to help me when I'm writing whether a fiction or a nonfiction source. Now, here's a visual that might help you understand what's going to happen. So, for every source, you're going to have a card that has that bibliographical citation, basically the specially formatted little line that tells us all we need to know about that source. Then you might have a few cards, maybe a couple paraphrase, maybe a couple quotation, where they have information about the source, either in your own words if it's a paraphrase, or a quotation if it's written word for word the way it appears in the source. So you might have multiple sources in which you have a source card for each of your source, and then you have little cards that go along with them that match up. Now this might be a physical card, or like the examples I showed you, it might be a Google slide. And this is going to help you keep track of all the sources and all the information. This is what happens that's going to help you outline and write much better. Now, we're going to practice it. I really want you to give it the best try you can, even if this seems a little confusing. I know you can handle it. So you're going to Canvas, and you're going to read the article, "The U.S. will accept more refugees." You're going to annotate the article in Notability. If you would prefer paper, use your iPad to print an article to the KITC. After annotating, I would like you to make 2 of each of the following cards based on the article. This means you're going to have a total of 4 sample cards. You're going to create 2 paraphrase cards and 2 direct quotation cards. These should be pieces of information that are significant from the article. All right, so I'm going to let you try it. If you have any questions, please send me an email.